Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to my regular Wednesday night live stream. Today I have someone who is known to a lot of you. Her name on Twitter, her handle is PhilosophiCat. That's also the same name of her YouTube channel. PhilosophiCat, hello, thank you for coming on my show.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad we could finally work out a time to do this.
Yeah, it's good, but we've spoken before, so that's nice.
Yes.
I'm not saying your name, right? Your name is to remain private?
Well, Cat is fine.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no worries.
It's publicly known.
Should I say PhilosophiCat or should I just call you Cat?
Cat is fine.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm a great lover of cats, by the way. Prefer them to dogs. I don't like dogs. For those who are wondering what this inside joke is, just before we sat down, like the dog, my housemate's dog Trump, was chasing two chickens, and the two chickens should be in their pen. I have no idea how they got out, and then poor Cat's hearing me scream at the dog, going, ah! Like, because
I thought there was some horrible bloodbath happening.
I'm surprised that he didn't kill one of the chickens, and he didn't, so that's good. So anyway, let's get on with the questions. So it'll be good questions. Okay, so you are a filmmaker. So why did you decide to do filmmaking? And
well, from an artistic standpoint, film is just a really beautiful medium of images and music and words that help convey an idea in this supreme way that touches a person, I think, both intellectually and emotionally, and sometimes crossing over into the spiritual as well. So when you're trying to express a vision of a different world and a new paradigm, utilizing this combination of image, sound, and word allows us the broadness of canvas that we need to express the ineffable upon it, and to take that idea that we can't normally apprehend as part of ordinary life and make it imminent, and to make the viewer feel like they're being transported on this transcendent journey. So originally I'd actually just intended to do the Revolt Against the Modern World series as just a more casual talking head discussion, chapter by chapter. But George convinced me that these ideas called for something a little more majestic. Initially I was kind of like, oh, but that's so much work, and it is a lot of work, but he does a really good job with the video stuff. So it doesn't, I don't have to do too much with it. He puts all the nice artistic touches on it, and I do the writing and the research. So it's a really nice collaborative effort, and I think it turned out to be better than if I just sat and talked about it.
Yeah, well, I've seen some of your videos, and they are are you editing it all yourself, out of curiosity?
George does the bulk of the editing. Initially, we were going to share it, but he just has a much more artistic flair and a really good eye for detail for this stuff, just in terms of
very well edited.
Yeah, he's just so good at just getting the transitions timed with the music and just choosing the clips. Like, I'll have input on the clips and stuff that we use, and there's often like kind of like a little theme within each episode that we're kind of trying to tie in subtly. But once we got started with it, it was clear that that was really more his wheelhouse than mine. And I have every faith that if I just leave him alone to do it, and I don't even check up on his progress, he comes back with something really amazing. And I might only have like one or two really minor things to add to it. So,
well, that's fabulous.
Yeah, it's ended up being really fun. And we found that we really kind of enjoy doing it, and we work very well together as a team on it. So, yeah, I guess we'll just continue doing it for the next 30-something episodes.
That's really good. I have no part at all in a video series that I'm airing on my own channel called Planned Illusion. And the guy who does it, his name is Jimothy. He's a friend of mine. He asked, can I put it on your channel? And I'm like, yeah, no worries. And it's just perfection. I'm like, how do people... I'm such a basic editor. Like, I don't know how to make it so, like, how to time it to music or anything like that. My editing skills are fine, but they're not epic. Like, it sounds like George is an artist with the medium, and that's really great. Like,
yeah, He has much more of an artist's soul than I do. I mean, I don't have an ounce of romance in my miserable soul, and he just sees beauty in everything. So it's much more suited to him to do that. But truth be told, like I'm not good with technology either, so I find it really frustrating to work with it. And I have some basic editing skills, but not like what he does. And we recently upgraded to Final Cut Pro so that we can do some fancier things with it. Because up until just a couple episodes ago, we were actually only using iMovie.
Oh wow, well that's all right.
Yeah. I thought we got good value out of iMovie, and I was really impressed with actually how much it could do. And it just goes to show that if somebody wanted to get into doing something like that themselves, you don't need a ton of expensive stuff to get started.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a nice way to cut our teeth. And then of course, Final Cut Pro is basically just like the full version of iMovie. It's the paid version of it. So it was really easy to just transition to using that.
Oh, nice. Oh yeah, that's good. You describe yourself as a perennialist. What is that, and why do you choose that as your specific label?
Well, to be honest, I don't actually call myself a perennialist, just because there's some confusion with the term. In the sense, that's okay. I can clarify. Like, in the sense of being a seeker of what we would call like Sophia Perennis and searching for those primordial truths that are in fact perennial, then I could call myself a perennialist. But unfortunately, what's now often meant by that term has been confused by some of Aldous Huxley's writings, which kind of took on this new age bent that isn't really compatible with the true perennial wisdom, in my opinion anyway. Maybe someone else wants to argue that it is. But to take it in its original meaning, it's like a flower that comes back every season. These teachings keep being seen and reflected through all these different traditions throughout time. And so for myself, I'm a seeker on a quest for wisdom, and that's what the perennial path is about. It's about that teaching that doesn't change and continues to be reflected and expressed through these organic pathways, instead of humans trying to craft like these clever ideologies and systems, whether that be monetary systems or social systems or whatever. Either trying to modify man's nature or create systems that deny reality, create a false paradigm. And instead of trying to socially engineer man, the perennialist is seeking those truths that exist beyond our understanding of them. They exist whether or not we're aware of them or understand them, and they keep coming back because they're woven into the very fabric of being. So in that sense, I would say... so in that sense, yeah, I could say I'm a perennialist. It's just that the term perennialism as an ism is, it's just a little bit confusing and open to misinterpretation.
Yeah, well, clearly that's exactly what's been happening. Okay, well, thank you for elaborating on that. That was really good. Is race preservation something you believe is of the utmost importance, or does it not bother you really?
That's always a touchy question with some people, which I've recently, I've, when we first talked about setting up this interview and you posed that question, I kind of had an answer in mind that I would have given. And then recently I've kind of had a little bit of a dialogue with another YouTuber called Apollonian Germ, in which he accused me of thinking race preservation is not important. And it was a whole big misunderstanding of my position on Twitter, of course, which is like, you can't even really explain yourself properly. No, it's like the only thing Twitter is good for is being misunderstood. Like, what else is it good for? And so I made a response video to it in which I sort of touched on some of these issues, and then I didn't go into it because I have a video coming up that's going to go more deeply into it, which is the next episode of the Revolt series. So to actually answer your question, do you want to say something else?
No, wait a second. The owner just got home. I want to tell me about the chickens. I'll be right back.
Okay.
No, the chickens got out. No, just talk about the dog. Let's attack them.
They will. That's what they do.
Well, why don't you save them now that you're here?
Save them?
Yes.
Fucking eat them.
No.
Well, you've already killed some of them.
I killed one by accident. Don't tell that. She's listening. No, stop it. I killed it by accident. I'll tell her the story in a second.
You're an evil chicken murderer.
Okay, well look, you're home now, so please save the chickens. Yes. I'm gonna close the door now that you're here. Sorry.
It's okay.
I did kill a chicken, but it was an accident, okay? All right, so what you were in the middle of saying. So you had a response video, and what you would have stated in that video that which you're about to say. Go.
Yeah, so you can leave it in. I'm sure it's amusing for people.
Yeah. So
oh
bad.
my god.
It was a bonding moment. I killed a chicken. I'll tell you that later. I'll tell you the story later.
Yeah, so in regards to actually answering the question, and I had to sort of come up with a bit of a different answer. And I'm probably still going to upset some people with my answer, but the answer is no. Like, it's not of the utmost importance, which is not to suggest that it has no importance at all, which is the assumption people make, which leads them to get mad at me for saying this. It does have some importance. It even has a lot of importance, but mere genetics are not the be-all, end-all of our existence. So while it's not something I think we should be authoritarian about or have governments mandating, I think overall it's a healthy thing to choose someone within your culture and ethnicity. And that's more than just race. It's also things like language and nationality, and someone who matches you personality-wise, and your desires and your dreams should all be on a similar path. And someone who most importantly shares your spiritual makeup. And you're most likely going to find such a person who matches you in those important ways by finding someone who's not just of your same race, but also more of your same ethnic or national background. I mean, I say that even just with somebody where I've had like cross-cultural relationships with someone else who is European, but of a different type of European. And there's just kind of this clash of expectations that it just add this layer of difficulty and complexity to a relationship that doesn't need to be there. So I would recommend people watch, in particular, of my Revolt series, episodes 7, 9, and soon to be released episode 10 for more on like how and why the racial connection is important, because it really goes so much deeper than just genetics, and it gets into the deeper spiritual connection that you have to your ancestors and the obligations you owe them and why. But to make it just about genetic racial preservation is not something I think is advised, nor is creating an authoritarian system to mandate such things. I think just something like protecting the borders, protecting the demographic mix is as far as we need to go. Because what else would you do? Are you going to start purging people who have the wrong percentage of a certain race? Because that would tear the nation apart in this quest for some impossible ideal.
I agree. I guess the what can be done is less advertisements of toothpaste ads and Colgate and all of that, of like maybe less propaganda, because it's like they're pushing something. Why don't you let people find themselves rather than sending out subliminal messages? I suppose that'd be my answer to what you're saying, but I agree with everything you've said.
Exactly.
I do.
Because most people do not naturally choose that. And the small percentage of people who do, like, there's always going to be some race mixing on the periphery of any society. It's unavoidable. It's a complete waste of time to try to use these authoritarian methods to stamp this out.
Completely agree.
And so, like, what's the percentage of people who are normally going to, like, choose to, marry someone of another race and have children of them? Like, maybe like 1% would naturally do that without outside input and propaganda. It's a tiny number. Now, a lot of people choose nowadays because they have been propagandized and they're being put in a situation where, you've got kids who might go to school and none of their classmates are the same race as them. And who else are they going to choose? That just ends up being their social circle. But that's not natural. Yeah. That's artificially constructed.
No,
so, I mean, completely. Like, primarily I'm a nationalist in that I see the nation state as the ideal structure to throttle the power of globalism. So that means to me, you know, working politically with like all of my fellow citizens, no matter what race they are. And I do think we need kind of a big tent right wing that unites people together under an idea and a value system of which preserving the uniqueness of each race is just one part of that instead of the central focus, and where demographic replacement, which is a great destabilizer of the nation, ends. And a lot of people are going to criticize this as being civic nationalism. And I know you're more of a civic nationalist, so I'm sure you've heard this.
I've heard that I'm a CivNat many times, and yes, I do lean on CivNat leanings, and I do have nationalistic leanings, but I've said in so many videos, it doesn't even matter what I say anymore, because they like to sort of impose what I am, and they go, oh, she's a CivNat. No, I'm not. Oh, she's too much of a white nationalist for the Jews and for the CivNats. No, I'm really not. Like, I really am not. Like, if you watch my videos, yes, I go against the nationalistic arguments, but I also, when I'm talking to a CivNat, I go against the CivNat arguments because I want them to see the nationalistic arguments. No one is ever pleased. It sounds like a lot of people are doing the same to you, imposing what you are.
Very
like,
much
no,
so.
This is what I am. F off.
Well, it's lazy thinking. And look,
I think I'm more of a CivNat. Yes.
One rule of life that I have found always holds true is that sloth wins. People will never think harder than they have to. People are fundamentally lazy. And so people are lazy thinkers. And what's the laziest way to think? Is to look for a label to pin on somebody so that you don't have to listen to what they're saying or actually think about the nuance of what they're saying. It's just like, oh, well, she's a CivNat. And then they just write off everything else that you have to say because they've decided that this is the label they're going to put on you, and they've decided they disagree with that label. And then they just go around pinning it everywhere. It's like a political version of pin the tail on the donkey. But of course, when you play pin the tail on the donkey, half the time you don't even get it on the donkey, or you get it on the wrong part of the donkey. Like,
that's a good one. Pin the tail. I used to play that. That's a good one. Yeah,
they just want to go around and like stick these labels on you, and they get really frustrated, of course, if the label doesn't fit, and then they really dig in their heels, and they actually spend more effort trying to force you to fit the label than if they just actually engage in an honest, genuine conversation with a desire to learn something and understand and seek the truth. But most people don't have any desire to do that. But you know, what I would say to those people who are criticizing any of this is like civic nationalism is that we have to work within the reality that we have. And in a multicultural country, civic nationalism is the best defense against globalism, because we need to first preserve the idea of the nation, like first and foremost, rather than becoming distracted by identity politics while our countries are being torn apart by subversion. You have to unite against a common enemy before you can address any of this stuff.
Yes, and in that you make allies that you didn't expect. And people are like, oh, that person's a bad person because they're talking to a tranny, or because they're talking to a gay person, or because this, or because that. You have to make do with the allies you have while you have them. And I'm not going to apologize for having friends of all different backgrounds.
Having an ally is not the same as choosing to marry and have children with that person. Like, these are completely different standards, but it's like, am I not allowed to find common ground with someone of another race? Because why exactly?
Well, that means you and I shouldn't be talking. How dare this half Colombian, half Spanish talk to this beautiful Aryan German looking brothers? Like, should we not be talking?
There are people who would say that, ridiculously enough, and
and those are the people I stay away from.
Well, and more I do too, to be honest, because I just don't. It's not helpful, and it's not productive, and the only people it actually serves are our enemies, because there's a reason. Well, I mean, just in terms of like, you know, taking the globalist agenda as a whole, there's a reason they've introduced multiculturalism. It's because they want us distracted by identity politics. Yes. Now, maybe there's some legitimate issues, you know, but the problem with talking about racial preservation is that it creates a division within a nation of a mix of people who do have a shared future together, like it or not. I mean, you might not like that people of another race live in your country, but they do. and your
Sorry,
futures
guys.
are now tied together. And it creates a
Mhm.
weakness in the fabric of the nation that can be exploited once you start engaging in these identity politics. There are legitimate grievances that different races might have about having to live together, but they do have to live together. It doesn't really benefit wider society to have racial conflict. When you have too much immigration, of course, you dilute the national identity. And this is where it starts to benefit the globalists because they want to see nations erased. So I'm not saying we should be welcoming multiculturalism because, we shouldn't, but we
No,
do need to work with the reality of the demographics we have, even if they're not the demographics we might want in an ideal world, because the fact is, we're never going to have an ideal world. That kind of purity spiraling is very unproductive, in my opinion. And for the people who want to live in an ethno-state, there are basically places that you can go that are effectively ethno-states. I mean, Japan is one of the most homogenous nations in the world. What are they, like 95% Japanese, but it's not 100%.
No, there's
not
like
100%.
a high percentage of Filipinos is there as well.
Exactly. There's nowhere and there never has been on Earth where it's like 100% just your people, because there's always that bleeding along the edges where it
but I think
transitions. But you
for
can go for a white American who wants to live in an ethno-state. Maine is like 96% white. Why don't you go move to Maine? If that's your biggest concern is just living among other white people, you could effectively go live there and have an ethno-state. It's not like there's a lot of immigration happening in Maine. There may be in the future. I'm sure they're working on that. But you have people who sit and want to talk about an ethno-state while they live in a state that is, maybe only 70% white, and they're unhappy about it.
Well, I feel like I didn't know that Maine. Yeah, that's a really good point. There are so many areas that are predominantly white, or build your own community. Like you can do that. Like that's a thing people do.
There are plenty of small towns that are still mostly white. Most of the rural areas still are. So they, even if they don't want to move to Maine, which I can't blame them because it's quite far away from everything, and there's, maybe not a lot of jobs there. That's always a consideration. But you can move to a smaller town. You can move out to the country.
Brazil has its own white section, Japanese section, a black section. Like countries do that. Countries have these inner societies within the larger society. It's definitely a thing. You're not wrong about that, and that's a good workaround for the people who complain about that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't maybe work to reverse certain demographic trends, but just sitting around and hating on other people isn't really a productive way to do that. And it's not,
really not.
I mean, it's not good for the nation as a whole, but I also just don't think it's good for white people to waste their energy on that. I don't think it's good for my race's future to sit there and be embroiled in these silly identity politics while globalists take over our countries. Because I'm not interested in living in an ethno-state if it's essentially a gulag. I'm just not. That doesn't sound fun to me. That's not conducive to raising a family.
It's not fun, but it sounds funny. Yeah, you're very right. Well, these people sit on their computers all day long playing games online, and I don't know, they do memes and they think they're making a difference, and I'm like, this is how you're spending your time, hating. Spending your time hating. Like you're talking about how much you hate this demographic and this demographic and this demographic, yet you claim to be Christian, yet you claim to be this, or yet you claim to be that. It's like it's what you said to me one time, which I've used the term I think twice now, and it's disenfranchised leftists. That's what is infecting the whole left-right paradigm. If you care to participate in that measure, which I don't. I'm not centrist. I'm not right. I'm not left. I don't care. I think the left is wrong about everything, but yeah, these are not the people that are helping us, and it's people like you who actually you're not a lazy thinker. You've thought about this. You probably have years on me regarding this topic, among many others. the whole
Hey now,
perennialist.
how old do I look?
Oh, you look, to be honest, I'm only going off our phone conversation. But you look the same age as me, if not younger, because you are very beautiful. I told you that at the start, silly.
You've got years of experience on me. I'm like, wow.
In this realm, in this space, in this online space, you do. But that doesn't mean you're older than me. So there.
It's fake outrage. I'm just a disenfranchised leftist, and I must participate in the outrage machine.
Yeah. Well, we can move on from this topic. I just felt like it was important to touch on. But thank you for your elaboration. Do you believe that women have a place in politics, or that they should remain in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant, like many men in the movement seem to think? By the way, I do this the movement because I want no part of the movement. I don't think any of the people who are in the movement are doing anything. I live with someone who's like trying to he's an anti-politician, and he's like he's a liberal Democrat, so he's very much a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian, but he's getting out there. He's a doer. Like a lot of these idiots aren't doers. So what do you think about men who talk that way? Do women have a place?
Let me answer this in a kind of roundabout way and just discuss let me just discuss it from a spiritual perspective instead, something more metaphysical. So in that metaphysical sense, in the Kali Yuga right now, we have the feminine principle is wide awake and the masculine is asleep. And that is essentially what happens in the Kali Yuga. In the Golden Age, in the Satya Yuga, the regal masculine function is awake and active, but in the Kali Yuga, sound asleep, and the feminine reigns. And so, we can see, to use some of the Hindu gods, Durga comes in the form of Kali, not the same as Kali Yuga, different meaning, but channeling the energies of Shakti. This is very feminine, and she comes to do the dance of destruction. She does this dance of death on the world, and it's only when the masculine aspect of Shiva steps in and he reins her in, then she stops. And he can't stop her if he's totally dormant. The problem is that this Shakti energy, this feminine energy, doesn't have her own direction. She's just pure power without any focus, without a vision of what to do with the power. So as a result, she can only destroy. That's all she knows how to do. And in this case, anyway, there's other types of Shaktis, including creative ones. But in this case, without Shiva to ground her, Shakti becomes infinitely restless to the point of destruction. So to make an analogy of this, if you think of lightning, sometimes when there's a thunderstorm in the sky, you will see like this sheet lightning that just goes all over the sky and doesn't really go anywhere. But if there's a point for it to focus on and to be grounded, some kind of a lightning rod, then it focuses to a point and it comes into a lightning bolt to make its way down to the earth. And Shiva is that lightning rod to ground that energy and to give it direction, because Shiva doesn't have any power on his own. There needs to be this interplay between the masculine and the feminine. It is complementary, because without the masculine, the feminine is just too destructive. But without the feminine, the masculine does nothing. And, just because that grounding element is masculine doesn't mean that it's strongly present in all men, or that it doesn't exist at all in women. And in this particular day and age, I think all that matters is that somebody is conveying truth. So I wish I could just be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and not worry about any of this stuff. But we don't have that luxury right now.
No, but you have a brain and you think.
Well, it's an ideal for a more peaceful time. And some women are of a different nature and are more suited to a different path. Perhaps they have more of that Shiva aspect within them, which the more developed a woman becomes at integrating her masculine aspect, because we all have masculine and feminine within us to some degree or another. Some women have more of a masculine aspect than other women do. It doesn't mean they're not still feminine. but it does mean that they can, to some extent, be that lightning rod for themselves in their own lives. Some women are of a different nature. They're suited to a more different path. And so the day I see the men getting it done entirely is the day that I retire from all of this completely, because I'm not doing this because I want attention or because I find it fun, but because I see something that needs to be done. And there's tremendous injustice in the world. It needs to be addressed. So I'm doing my part as best I can. And I think there are a lot of other women who see this too, yourself included, who feel a need to speak out because it's just not getting done by anyone else. Or they just
I don't see them actioning anything. They just talk and sit behind computers and do a rally once a year. Like, it's just frustrating. Sorry, keep going. I mean to interrupt.
That's not to say that men aren't doing anything, but women have something to contribute as well. And looking at just like the current kind of political climate, and in particular right-wing politics, because I've been involved in this stuff for a very long time. It's back at the point where there really were no other women involved in the dissident right. I would go to a conference and there would be maybe 5 other women there tops out of 100 per 300 people. And I was the only one under the age of 50.
We're a rarity.
Whereas now you could go to a conference of 300 and a third of them will be young women. But I've also noticed that with the rise of YouTube, is that female voices actually seem to be a little bit more effective sometimes. I think in part, some people will just brush that off as being like, oh, it's just because she's pretty and people just want to look at her. I think what it is actually
not our fault.
Well, there is probably an element to that. That may be true in some cases. But what's wrong with packaging up a message in an attractive package to deliver it to people if it makes it more palatable? But it's also, I think, just the softness and the cordiality that women can bring to that conversation. When I listen to male commentators, many of them are extremely intelligent, but they can be very shouty, or they cuss a lot, or they come across very angry. And, for other women to listen to that, some of them just don't like it, especially if they're very new to politics. It really pushes people away. It pushes norm. I think women do a better job of reaching out to other women and to normies and fence sitters, because I think we can present a message in a way that's just a little bit more friendly than men tend to do. And that doesn't mean we don't get angry, but, maybe occasionally in an interview or something, I've gone off on a rant or something. I'm sure I'm not scaring anyone. Like, as much as I might sometimes want to be able to intimidate somebody, I know that I probably don't.
No, that's fair enough.
So I'm not even going to try. I'll leave that to the men.
Such a lovely package.
So this idea that women shouldn't be involved in politics at all is a bit silly. And I had commented something about that on my Telegram that I think you had responded to, or another woman did. I'm pretty sure it was you, where I had kind of said that,
I love your Telegram.
Oh, thank you. I don't post on it enough. Where was I going with that?
I tried to add you in my own one, but you're so private on it. I'm like, I can't add you to my channel. Not even the group, just the channel part, because my channel's private. That's all right.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll work that out. Yeah, I don't like to use it too much because I get too many messages from people I don't know, and it becomes very cluttered. And I don't know. I don't like strangers just messaging me necessarily. But yeah, I know you.
Yeah. So your point was that you wrote a status about women, and in the movement, I think. Women
in politics.
Movement.
I don't like the term either. I had a conversation with Semiagog a few months ago, and we kind of discussed a bunch of these terms and why we don't like them. And the movement was one of them. And he had some really good points to make on that. So I recommend people go watch that. I think I've got it on a playlist on my channel somewhere.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But yeah, now I've lost my train of thought about women in politics. So just never mind. Even just go look on my Telegram and find it.
Fair enough.
We can move on.
Yeah, we'll move on. I agree that there's a place for some, and that's don't belong in it at all. But yeah, we've just got, we're more alert because we took that damn red pill. All right, let's have a look. Why do you not identify as a traditional woman? This was on your, the reason I asked this question was because of an earlier post you wrote on your Telegram so long ago where you go, I don't identify as a trad woman. So do you want to give people your definition of what a trad woman is and why you're not one of what that is?
I tried to say it so nicely, and a few people
You
still
did?
unsubscribed.
Really? Wow, people
Yeah,
bucket
well,
these days.
well,
Didn't
they
bucket
are.
me.
All those disenfranchised leftists.
Which we know means far right morons, but anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So look, first of all, as far as the trad aesthetic goes, this was another topic I talked about on that same stream with Semi Agog, was the concept of trad. Yeah,
okay.
you might like it.
Yeah.
As far as that aesthetic goes, it's an excellent stepping stone to learning the deeper aspect of what capital T tradition is really about beyond the aesthetic and the more basic understanding of just things like gender roles, etc. It's a longing for an easier time and a simpler time. And in modern history, the period that's most looked upon like that is the post-war period of like the 1950s. And it was seen as a nice and peaceful society. I can understand why people are attracted to that. It's a lot better than anything else being offered right now, frankly.
Yes,
but
very true.
The reason I don't call myself trad is because it's too limited into those aesthetics than the deeper understanding of real perennial and primordial tradition, which isn't about aesthetics, but the underlying spiritual quest that is expressed through various esoteric teachings. So to put it more simply, trad is exoteric, like very exoteric. And I'm not hostile.
Esoteric is as layered as you can possibly get.
Yes.
That makes it more convoluted.
I'm not hostile to trad, but it doesn't describe what I'm a part of. And I would encourage women to explore it if it attracts them. And there is some good to be found there. But for me personally, I just see it as something that should just be a very initial stepping stone to something more fundamental. And it's not that I even disagree with the values, because they aren't even values. They're just aesthetics. There's no substance there. So saying something like you believe men should work and women should raise children is not a value. It's a preference or a belief based in an ideology. And virtually none of the people who espouse that idea can point to a deeper spiritual meaning as to what the value is that is actually manifesting those gender roles. And I could make a spiritual case for why that is actually traditional.
I could make a biblical case for it too. Yeah.
But most of the people who repeat that stuff can't. And you have to go into the... Like you have to, no, it's just a part of an ideology. It's a belief. It sounds nice to them, but they don't actually understand where it's coming from. They're not understanding what it's representing of the metaphysical dynamics of masculine and feminine, and how it's meant to function together in a way that should actually, if you follow those gender roles, bring you to greater spiritual heights in that partnership. So for me, you have to go into the wisdom teachings to find the parts of tradition that are worthwhile to me personally. Some people can find meaning in the trad stuff, but for me, I just found it overly simplistic and bourgeois.
I like that. I think that's very well stated. I also think that a lot of these men, they want a woman. The way they make it sound is as if they literally want a 1940s, 50s woman, which means that they might as well just go to the closest sex shop and buy a woman they can blow up and then use that. The only thing, because she's got everything that they want. She stay quiet and then they can do whatever they want to her. And then that's not what they want. And so it's like, well, what do you want, a woman, or do you want a submissive maid? Like they don't know what they want. It's always women can't preach, women can't this, women shouldn't be leaders. It's like, well, some women are made for more than what your definition of what a woman is.
I think a lot of that stems from insecurity on their part, because that I wouldn't
Sorry.
even say idiocy, because a lot of them are actually very smart. I don't think it's a case of them not having the intelligence to grasp it, but I do think it's a case of being underdeveloped as a person, just in the same way that feminists are underdeveloped people in the way that they hate men or project stereotypes onto men. Men do the same thing to women, and it's essentially what it is that, you know, they haven't integrated that opposite sex part of themselves like we talked about before. So for a man, he has an inner feminine called his anima, if we want to use the Jungian term for it. And a lot of men have a very underdeveloped anima. And from a Jungian perspective, like, I don't know how familiar you or your audience might be with that, but, you know, you've got you have a shadow side of yourself that is like all the parts of you that you don't want to accept as you.
Yeah,
and that's,
for sure.
You could almost say that your anima or animus is the opposite gender shadow side of yourself. So in order to integrate that opposite gender shadow, you need to integrate the main shadow first, really. Most people don't have the moral courage to do that because it's a very difficult and painful process that involves some really radical self-honesty. And not everybody has the willingness or the ability to seek truth to that level. I can't judge somebody who just simply is unable to do that. But for men who have these views about women where you say, like, they just want like a submissive maid who cooks and cleans for them and is available for sex whenever they want it, or, you know, whatever the stereotype happens to be, that's really a sign of an underdeveloped anima, where because they're not in touch with their inner feminine and they reject that part of themselves, they project a bunch of crap then onto all women. But when they find one woman, they have a tendency to kind of, instead of seeing her as an actual human being and connecting with her as another human being, they're just connecting with the projections that they're putting onto her. Like she's a blank canvas that they paint onto. And what inevitably happens in a relationship where that's a problem, and this goes opposite as well for, you know, you can reverse the genders and have it still be true. When the partner does not live up to the ideal that has been painted on them as a blank canvas, their partner becomes very angry.
For
because
sure. Easily.
they want to have a certain belief about reality that is, so let's say, you know, you're the woman in this case, and I'm probably describing relationships for a lot of people because it's shockingly common. Most people have not done the self-work on themselves to have anything other than the most basic anima or animus, and they function on the appropriate level and it's obvious. But so if your partner is projecting that onto you, let's say he's decided for whatever reason, oh, Dia's so pretty and I'm going to marry her, and he's in love with an ideal that he wants you to live up to. And a couple years down the road of marriage, he's starting to realize that you're not actually like that at all. You're a person in your own right, and you're constantly doing things that contradict that ideal that he had in his mind. Then he's angry with you because he doesn't accept that he had incorrect expectations that were not in line with reality, and that those expectations are the source of his disappointment, and that that's indicative of something he needs to work on within himself. Instead, he's angry with you for disrupting what he wanted to believe was real.
That's funny, isn't it?
And I would imagine that a lot of men and women have at least one relationship in their past where they can say, oh yeah, my partner did that to me. But the reality is you've probably done it to a partner yourself as well.
Perhaps. I apologize. Yeah.
And look, the younger a person is, the more likely that is to happen, because this is wisdom that we gain with life experience that takes years to develop. I mean, I feel terrible for the person I was dating when I was 18. I hope he's recovered from that. I hope he's not too traumatized. But, you know,
he was blessed to have you.
Well,
For the
you know,
time
you
you
learn and grow from relationships. Hopefully, ideally, you learn and grow from them. If it doesn't work out, you can look back and say, this is what I did wrong. This is where I need to grow. Problem is,
of
most
course.
people don't do that. Like if I was going to give dating advice to somebody, which is a little bit off topic from your question, but is slightly related to what we're currently talking about, you know, it would be a good idea to find out what that person's ideal partner is.
For sure.
And then ask them about their exes.
And don't let them
How do their exes compare to what their ideal partner was? And what are the complaints they have about their exes? Are the complaints mostly blaming the other person, or do they take responsibility for it themselves? Everyone's had a bad relationship, right? That's not necessarily a deal breaker. But if the bad relationship was 100% the other person's fault, and it's 100% the other person's fault in every relationship they've had, you're dealing with a person who hasn't learned from their relationships, who is perhaps not capable of growing. And that's a huge red flag.
That sounds like a person who exists, though. I can see people who, I'm wrong a lot of the time, so I'm just used to going, "Oops, my bad, sorry." Like it's so often. But yeah, in relationships, people struggle to admit when they're wrong, for sure.
They do, and it's a sign of maturity to be able to admit when you are wrong, to apologize, or to look back at a relationship and say, "Oh, this is what I did to screw it up. And yes, the other person did stuff too, but how are you going to change in your next relationship?" Someone who can't identify how they should have changed because of something is someone who's not ready to date again.
That's very wise.
That's somebody who relives the same relationship pattern over and over again. And this is the same kind of person who's going to say, there's no good men or there's no good women. It's like, well, no, you're the common denominator there. Sorry to say, you're one of the not good ones.
Yes, for sure. I think I agree with the dating portion of our interview.
Wasn't really planned, but there you go.
But no, it works out well. I like these tangents. Okay, one of my questions is, what is your fascination with Julius Evola?
Well, he's a very interesting character. He was a multilinguist. He wrote on a huge range of topics. He's a mountain climber for spiritual reasons. He's an artist, a researcher of original texts. He's a master of the occult. And through his various works, he's taken many of the treasures of the ancient world and he's given them new life in the present, preserving things that, you know, we probably would have otherwise lost. And primarily, I like him because he's a spiritual man and he approaches the various things he writes about from the perspective of a spiritually centered mindset. So he was looking to actually experience the wisdom, not just know it from an intellectual or theoretical standpoint. And he really tried to live in an immanent way. Knowledge to him was only meaningful if it was really lived. He's not someone who's so lost in his pontificating that they forget to live what they're preaching, which is common among many other philosophers. This drive in him sent him to the peaks of mountains, led him to the deepest, dustiest corners of monastic vaults, learning long dead languages to read these original manuscripts. Many other philosophers are creating something that can only exist in an intellectual framework. It's an abstraction of their mind. It's not something that can be lived. And they're so lost in the world of their imaginations and so in love with their own mental creations that have no practical value. Trying to establish a man-made system to bring order to a scary world just because they don't have the spiritual grounding to find the natural order in the universe. And so I really appreciate that about Evola because he is speaking from the perspective of someone who has experienced these things and he has found that natural order in the universe. He doesn't need to come up with a new system. He's just trying to explicate what already exists in the fabric of the cosmos.
Okay. And which of his views do you most agree with and which do you oppose?
Well, Evola's not really providing you with his own opinion on things most of the time. He's He's really instead explicating what different traditions thought and trying to find a common thread. He's looking for the reflections of the divine order here on earth throughout the ages. And he's not saying that the ancient world of recorded history was a golden age, but that it contains some leftover pieces from a time even further back than that. And when we see these reflections across time, then we can start to find a coherent view of what makes man who he is, and how should we structure society to be in line with the cosmic order. And so I find this worldview to be incredibly rich and comprehensive, and it's like a tapestry containing all the most profound teachings in world history, all organized in a coherent system. I mean, he was incredibly well read. And you can either recognize what he's saying is the truth or not, because he's not trying to convince anybody. It's actually quite rare for him to insert his own opinions, and he always states when he's doing so. And now he is using an inductive process, which almost seems a little bit like postmodernism sometimes. He's going from intuition and what he sees in his mind's eye as a spiritual person. And it's possible that he's gotten a few things wrong, because it would be hard to cover so many topics and never make an error. But even if something's expressed imperfectly, it doesn't necessarily tarnish the whole worldview. Now, as for what I disagree with, that's a different question. So let me put it this way. The man was a master of knowledge in so many different fields, and I have learned a lot from him, but it's not the business of the student to critique the master. And that's not to say I warranty all of his opinions and ideas, but I don't want to respond like some dilettante trying to provide some kind of critique of his ideas when I'm not equipped to do so. He obviously knew so much more than what actually made it into his books, just as I know so much more than what makes it into each of my episodes. I simply don't have the same depth of knowledge that he did. I mean, for example, he learned several languages just to read ancient texts in their original writings. So what grounds do I have to disagree with him on his interpretation of a text that I haven't read in a language that I don't speak? That would be the utmost hubris. And perhaps by the end of my lifetime, I'll have accumulated enough knowledge of my own to provide a legitimate critique of something. But as it stands, I'm far too young and uneducated to be critiquing somebody like Evola. And I'm not one to go for, as I said, like this dilettantism, which is so prevalent among commentators, where they just want to sort of drop their hot takes for clicks and be edgy. And I don't have any interest in that. To me, that's a very ego-driven thing, and that's something that, spiritually I try to keep that in check as much as possible.
Humility is a struggle for many people.
It is a struggle for many people, and it's not even a question of being humble as such, but of just recognizing when your ego desire is working against your own best interests or preventing you from finding the truth. And I feel like ego-driven hot takes they're a hindrance to real conversation and real learning. If I ever had a critique to provide, I would probably not even feel comfortable sharing it necessarily, because I would always I have this problem with every video I make too, which is why I don't make so many, because I always want to make sure that I know everything before I make a really concrete statement about something. I don't want to go out and declare this is right because I believe it to be so, because I have so many doubts in my own mind, and I know there's so many things that I haven't read, and there are so many people who know much more than I do. So I don't ever want to try to present myself as some kind of an expert. I'm kind of more like how in school there was always the one student who just always did the homework and always listened to the teacher and just knew everything, and that's the kid you go to ask for help with your homework or try
that
to
wasn't me.
Test or something.
Yeah.
Just think of me as that student. You can, I'm letting you copy my homework. You can look at my test. I'll answer your questions. And that kind of was me in school. I'm sorry, like it didn't make me very popular, but I did get a lot of homework help requests. I just didn't get a lot of friends. I was the kid who was correcting the teacher's grammar. Excuse me, Mrs. Teacher, but you put the comma in the wrong place on the board.
Oh, that's funny. The teacher would have wanted to slap you.
Oh my gosh.
She would have liked you, maybe.
I was definitely more on the annoying spectrum than the endearing spectrum, but I mean,
Sheldon Cooper.
Yeah, probably. I've had too many vaccines. I'm probably a bit autistic, so.
That's funny.
I was just watching your interview with Sherry Tenpenny a little bit ago, and so which I really liked, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, she's.
I've actually never listened to an interview of her before, even though I know who she is. So it was really interesting to listen to. So anyone out there who hasn't listened to it should go listen.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I'm happy to move on to the next question, which was, what are your thoughts on Christianity and how did you arrive at these opinions? Because for those who haven't noticed, your spirituality hasn't been biblically based in our interview. You've sort of referred to other things like Shiva and all that kind of stuff. I know you're not a Christian because you told me that.
Look, I think most genuine religions have a shared goal as a quest for the transcendent. So in that sense, I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong religion for a person to follow as long as that's the goal. And people choose religions for all different reasons, of course. Not everybody who chooses a religion is seeking the transcendent. But it's kind of like how different diets are suitable for different types of people. So if you were raised to believe something that just falls flat for you and doesn't resonate with you, it's time to explore other religions. And that's what happened in my case. So I was raised in a very strict Catholic family. I was a very devout little Catholic girl. I even considered becoming a nun at one point. And ultimately, it just didn't answer the questions that I had. And I became increasingly frustrated with it. And my experience, just my personal experience with it within my family and the church that I went to, was very negative. So it didn't work for me. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth regarding Christianity as a whole, which resulted in me spending years as being this militant atheist who just hated all religion. And then finally, when I was ready to kind of open my mind and heart again, I explored other traditions. I couldn't see myself ever going back to Christianity just because of my own experience with it. But ironically, it was only after exploring other traditions that I came to be able to appreciate Christianity and actually see the good in it again. And had I not gone through that process, I would not have a very nuanced view of Christianity or religion in general, I'm sure. So, you know, some people will thrive on a path that another person would wither on. So I never say what's best for anyone. I only encourage people to explore sufficiently to find, you know, whatever it is they need to find for themselves. And even though Christianity turned out not to be for me, I do have a lot of respect for Jesus and his teachings. And especially coming back and looking at it again, you know, later with a fresh perspective, I appreciate it so much more than I did when I was actually a practicing Catholic. There's a lot of value to be found in what he personally taught. I can't disavow Jesus. Like, it's not going to happen. And I know
disavow.
I know you're very Christian, and I think it's great that you found a path that's fulfilling for you and that can bring you closer to God. I would
argue with you that Catholicism and Christianity are the same because my mother was a Catholic and now she's a Christian. But
I know a lot of Protestants feel that way.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. To me, it's more the whole
the gospel.
There's just there's a lot of elements of Abrahamism within Christianity that I think make it unsuitable for me. Islam is also Abrahamic as well, which is why I know a lot of traditionalists, capital T traditionalists in the philosophical sense, a lot of them gravitate towards Sufism, which is a branch of Islam. It's the esoteric branch of Islam. It's very mystic.
Yeah.
I can understand why they do so. I can still see why they find a path to the transcendent on that. But for me, I just don't jive with those sort of Abrahamic elements. It just doesn't resonate for me.
Well, that's unfortunate,
but
but fair enough.
Well, look, Christianity also has a lot of dharmic elements too. There's pretty much nothing Jesus teaches that is not in line with dharma. I know some people even think that
I'm
he
not
spent
too
his
familiar with
well, I know some people think he spent his, so-called missing years in India studying with the rishis. Some other people say he went to Egypt and it was inducted into the Egyptian mysteries. Wherever he went, he obviously went and he studied, and he came back to try to essentially teach Dharma to his Jewish community, who had, really gone astray with some of their beliefs. And they killed him for it, essentially. I mean, what he was saying was just too problematic for the rabbinical authority at the time. And so Christianity, as it evolved as a religion, has incorporated, because there are so many years, of this different Jewish sects trying to influence it, and the Romans trying to influence it. And then you've got Jesus's teachings, but you've also got his apostles writing things. And it kind of became sort of a mishmash of parts of Abrahism and parts of things that are very dharmic coming together in Christianity. And so I can't say that there's nothing good in Christianity, or that it's not, that people shouldn't follow that path, because there is still good to be found in it. And who am I to tell somebody that that you shouldn't follow that, because I personally didn't find it fulfilling. I would much rather see somebody be a sincere Christian than be an atheist.
Oh, I understand what you mean by that. Like you value authenticity above anything is pretty much what you're saying, whether it be in faith, whether it be in politics, whether it be in how you conduct yourself throughout daily life. If you're authentic, that's the key. That's sort of, yeah. No, I like that. That's good. Okay, what are your thoughts on paganism, and how did you arrive at those opinions? That's the second last question.
Well, I actually spent some time looking into European paganism when I was finding my way back to spirituality. And I wasn't terribly impressed with what I found. But then when I re-examined the ideas through the lens of Vedic teachings, again, I started to think of it differently. And at that point, I was, again, able to open my mind to the truths that can be found within paganism as well. Why I found it unfulfilling was largely because what we have left of European paganism is just sort of an outer shell that's lost a lot of its deeper metaphysical teachings. And, there's a lot of reasons for that people speculate about. But understanding Vedic teachings helped me put that European faith in a more holistic perspective and appreciate what it once would have meant as a complete system. And so after developing some spiritual insight, I was able to come back to it again, like I did with Christianity, and look at it with a newfound appreciation and respect. And I can many times see in what appears to be a simple idea the esoteric counterpart to it, where the person is actually participating in something on a deeper level than they realize, and probably getting benefits from it that they don't even realize. But I mean, not being either Christian or pagan, I mean, I really don't ascribe to any particular religion as such. I try to be open to the truths I can find anywhere. But I mean, I'm not either Christian or pagan. I really dislike the constant bickering between them that I see online. I don't have a dog in that fight. I
did bicker. I bickered with Lana Locktiff. I'm like, what's the point of being part of a religion if you're just part of that religion because your ancestors were? That sounds silly to me, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, it was a great dialogue, but I was like, paganism is like, don't you guys sacrifice animals? And she goes, no. She goes, that's a type of paganism. I'm not part of that paganism. So it's like, I was like, yeah. So you're right. There is bickering.
I would actually argue that the animal sacrifice is not originally part of it and is deeply offensive to the gods. Some pagans, I'm sure, would disagree with me. I don't believe it belongs in paganism. But in terms of like the dispute between the Christians and the pagans, I don't believe in proselytizing anyway. I but I stand back and I watch people tear each other down in the name of what they believe to be higher principles, instead of actually living those principles and finding common ground. I don't think they need to be at odds. You know, as I said, there's a lot of dharmic influences in Jesus's teachings.
Yes.
He was a Dharma master. His teachings are very compatible with that. And of course, Dharma being at the core of European paganism, if you look at it as a complete system. And this is kind of part of my attraction to the Vedic tradition, just because I see it as a more pure version of these teachings. And Christians and pagans just package it in a different cultural context. And of course, there are some significant points of disagreement among them. But in terms of actual core values of how we should live and how we should treat other people, you know, I do think people could do a bit better of a job of living up to the values they claim to espouse. And for myself personally, because I'm ultimately like, I just feel like I'm just a spiritual seeker, and I don't want to attach to a particular pathway at this point. At least I may change my mind about that in the future when I'm done with my questing. But I want to find the truths that each has to offer, look for that common thread. And because I tend to lean more towards the esoteric side, I don't have a lot of interest in the exoteric stuff of the religion that to me is, I don't want to say it's useless, because it's not. It is actually representative of something deeper, but I'm just more interested in the deeper stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm just kind of like, I'm just sitting back and I'm like, yes, I can appreciate this about this religion and this religion. There's probably no religion that I can't find something worth appreciating about it that has some, you know, transcendent truth in it to be found, especially from an esoteric lens, which I'm not making the claim, which some people would say that I am, is that they're all the same. They're all the same at their core. I'm not saying that at all. But in terms of finding God and them being different pathways to find God, I mean, is God really so exclusive that you can only find God if you belong to the right club? And if so, where does that leave the majority of the people in the world who aren't in the right club? There's
a lovely place that has flames.
Well, you know, I think it was Saint Faustina who had a vision of hell, and she said that most people in hell don't even realize they're in hell. And I think one of the apparitions of Mary at Medjugorje, one of her messages was that 95% of people or something like that will go to hell.
I don't know about that. That's a random.
In terms of thinking about it as being completely separated from God, how many people in this world have a connection to God anymore? A real, genuine connection that's going to be strong enough to carry them to the heavens after they die. And I had a lot of fun making my last Revolt episode on the afterlife, the 2 paths in the afterlife.
Oh, okay. I'll have to have a look.
I could have just kept making that episode forever, because I'm a very morose and macabre person, and I'm just like, ooh, death, let's read about that. My teenage goth years creeping back. But it was just really interesting to read all of these different ideas that the ancients had about death, and where do you go after death, and how do you make that leap to God? And one that really grabbed me as being particularly interesting was the concept of the bardos from the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Okay.
And how they describe these 3 tests that you go through when you die. And, and so the first one reminded me a lot of what people describe as a near-death experience when they see like the light in the tunnel. And it really made my mind start turning and wondering like, oh, is that like actually a thing? The first test they describe is basically, you basically come face to face with the absolute, with God as just formless power. And it's like the sound of 1,000 thunderbolts, probably pretty overwhelming. Your test is to be able to identify with everything that is both awesome and terrifying in that power. That is to see yourself as part of it. Most people will instantly fail this test and run away in terror. The second bardo, the second test, is you are then presented with God in form. And that what that form takes is going to be somewhat dependent on what you believed about God and life. So as a Christian, you might see Jesus, or if you're Hindu, you might see Krishna. And initially, this is presented in a very compassionate and loving way. And you would think, oh, no problem identifying with that. I can see myself as part of, Jesus, who's very loving. Except remember what we said about the shadow and all the things we want to, that are a part of ourselves that we deny, all the things we don't want to believe are true about ourselves, which are mostly like really bad things. Well, you're dead now. So your ego's been completely stripped away and there's nothing to protect you from that. And now you're standing in the full glory of God and feeling a lot of shame and guilt. And you probably feel pretty unworthy to stand in the presence of God, right?
For sure, I would. I know I would, because I've sinned a lot. Yeah.
Then the trap people fall into is identifying with all of that shame rather than identifying with God. And the form of God starts to become more and more terrifying the longer you wait. And now if you fail that test and you run away from that, then the Tibetans say, well, rebirth is now certain. You will now reincarnate on this earth because you're not ready to go back to God. And you go to the third bardo. The third bardo is described as being this terrifying hellscape with, just overwhelming noise and stuff going on. And most people will instantly run for the first safe womb gate that they can find to be reborn.
Okay.
And then you have no influence then over the conditions of your rebirth. But if you're forced to take rebirth and you can still keep your wits about you in that situation, you can influence the conditions of your rebirth. And you can, if you can just stop and center yourself and ignore everything that's going on around you and not run towards the first attractive rebirth that might initially appear nice but isn't, you can say like, oh, well, in this life, I'll actually have the opportunity for spiritual growth. This one might be a life of material comfort and I'll never know God and I'll be right back here again.
I understand.
And then you have a chance at least to give yourself a better shot in the next life so that when you die again, you might be able to pass the first or second bardo. And I found that so interesting. And I didn't even get a chance to talk about it. It was too off topic to go into that in the episode, but it was really fascinating to be able to read about stuff like that and to think about the implications of that. What happens when we meet God? And for people who say that they have had an encounter with the divine, overwhelmingly people will say that they don't feel worthy to be in its presence. So what do we have to do in order to become worthy so that when we're confronted with it, we can say, yes, I belong there.
You accept Jesus into your heart as your personal savior for dying on the cross for your sins.
But it's not enough just to live a good and moral life and follow the rules. You have to really develop yourself spiritually. You have to basically try to become like Jesus.
You have to be Christ-like. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, the esoteric.
It's a byproduct. Sorry, go.
The esoteric parts of Christianity I find endlessly fascinating, even though there's a lot of elements in like that sort of Gnosticism that I think are a bit life denying, and they're not things that I could get on board with. I do find some of their biblical interpretations of these stories to be very rich and very spiritually enlightening. And I mean, this is another reason why I can't disavow Jesus because I'm not a Christian. It's like, but his story is so compelling. Even if you didn't believe that he's legitimately the Son of God, which I think you could make a really good case that he possibly was, even if you didn't even if you didn't believe that, just his whole story and what it says about the human condition and the spiritual quest and what we need to do to transcend and rise on that vertical path is, there's so much worthwhile to be gleaned from that.
Uh-huh. That's so good that you see that, though. Like, where my mind, I understand that from an outsider's perspective, I come off as really rigid. This is it. This is the way. Blah blah blah. But the reason I come off that way is because when you think you know, why would you say, well, every religion can lead you to God when that's not what your book is telling you? And it's like how you were speaking earlier about Julius Evola. Who are you to even attempt to critique him? Who am I to question the Bible? Who am I to question God, the one ultimate, omnipotent, omniscient power that designed and created us? Like, who am I to question him? That's why. So I'm just trying to parlay it so that you understand why I'm so rigid. But yeah, and I think you would have known that anyway. I
can understand that, especially because when I was younger and I was very, very Catholic. I was the same way too, and I was and I just go around like trying to proselytize to everybody because I was so sure that I had the right answer, and that's common. Anytime somebody believes they have the right answer, not even just religious. Yeah. Well, and sometimes people need to walk away and come back just to get a fresh perspective. But
I think so.
Anytime somebody thinks they have the right answer, especially when it comes to something that was very life-changing for a person. Like, for example, take like Jordan Peterson, for example. He was so life-changing to so many people, and people who got benefit from listening to his lectures and reading his books went around telling everyone about Jordan Peterson. They want to shout it from the rooftops because it's made such a difference in their life. Yeah. And I can completely understand that. And it's the same thing when you find a religion that really speaks to you. For me, I just have known so many people of so many different faiths who have found God in different ways. And I can't say that one person's experience appears to be more legitimate than another's.
And that's very true, because who are you to fight one person's specific experience because it happened to them? I so understand what you're saying. I do.
And, when you find that on your own path, you want to share it with other people. And I don't think there's anything, I mean, I don't agree with like pushing it on people who aren't receptive to it, just because I think that can be counterproductive. It can turn people off from a path if they're not ready. Absolutely. If they're not ready to walk it, you can plant the seeds, but it should never, teach, but don't preach. So I don't ever try to tell people to do anything that I'm doing just because it worked for me. But if someone has questions about it, I'm always happy to answer and give them guidance and try to help them. And part of that is because I know from firsthand experience how off-putting it is to have someone try to shove a belief system on you that doesn't resonate with you, or you're just not at the right place in life to hear it. And, somebody might go through life as an atheist, swearing they'll never, ever be religious. And then they have like some health scare when they're 70 that puts everything in perspective, and they realize they're approaching the end of their life and haven't done anything meaningful. And now suddenly they start going to church. Whereas if you tried to get them to go to church when they were 30, maybe because you did that, you caused them to postpone doing it for another 10 or 20 years because they had such a negative experience with you. So I always try to avoid that. And I think
no, that's lovely. That's fair.
I always try to counsel Christians to avoid that as well, because I have known so many people who have been turned off from Christianity just because of negative experiences with people preaching to them. And I don't want somebody to be turned off from Christianity if it would help them.
That's very sweet of you. Yeah, I agree. Even my mother did it for a while. Me, my sister, my brother, we were like, shut up. Like, why does everything, like, we could be talking about walking down the street and somehow she'd relate that to God, and we're like, we're talking about the street. Like, why does that somehow go back to the Bible? And so she stopped. It took her a long time though, but she did finally stop. And I'm the one of the 3 kids. Like we all have faith, but I'm the one of the 3 kids that she mostly talks to about Christ, because I came back to it on my own. I'm like, oh my gosh, Mom, I prayed for this and this happened. She's like, oh, hooray! Like, little things like that. So yeah, you're right. It's a good way to counsel Christians, because it is so off-putting. I hate it myself, and I am a Christian, and I was being pushed. It was being pushed more onto me, and I'm like, ew, like, go away. Like, yeah. So it's sound advice for sure. My last question is, you're quite well aware of the different circles that exist on the right in the movement of several different countries. You're obviously originally American. I know you've lived in Europe, you've lived all over. So what is your opinion of the state of the movement in the United States, in Australia? What do you know of it, and what is the state of it? Because my opinion is that we're in dire straits.
I mean, it's better than it used to be, certainly.
Okay.
I mean, if you asked some of the people who were in the movement in the 90s if they could ever imagine that the movement would be where it is now, they would be like, no way, or even in the 2000s, it didn't really kind of start to take off in its current form until kind of like the early teens. And at that point, I was kind of taking a few years off because I was just kind of sick of the toxicity of it. And, that is a big problem. The high turnover in the movement due to toxic dynamics. Most people don't last more than about 5 years, and many people a lot less than that. The people who last longer are either like the real serious troopers, or they're people who have ruined their lives to the point that they cannot re-enter normal society. There's probably a lot more ex-movement people than there are actually in the movement. And that doesn't mean that they have changed their minds on any of their beliefs, just that they didn't want to be a part of that sort of social scene anymore. So I think there's still a lot of improvement to be had. But I also think it's come a long way as well. And as I said before, I think a lot of that is due in part to more women becoming interested in it and just kind of softening it up and giving it a nicer package to present to normies. The vast majority of content creators that I would forward to somebody who's starting to ask questions, most of them would probably be women creators. Not because they necessarily have the most intelligent takes or they're the most well-spoken, but just because they're accessible. And it's something, they're not, pushing too hard on these edgy topics that normies aren't ready to hear. So, I mean, the movement has its pros and cons. I kind of increasingly feel myself drifting away from it and having not a lot in common. And a lot of that just comes down to the heavy focus on the race issue, which was more important to me when I was an atheistic, materialistic ideologue in my youth. And then race becomes the thing you latch onto. And it was also a period of time where, I was just kind of coming into sort of like a racial awareness and really starting to feel that, like, yeah, white people are under attack and we need to do something about this.
And that's all true. Yeah, and that's all true. But it's how you respond to it and how you rise from it that's more important. If you're gonna go around like being a moron to people, or latch on to people or whatever it is, you're not going to get anywhere. I'm not interested in politics anywhere near what I was. Now I'm more issue based. Like I like talking about child sex abuse, vaccines, immigration, abortion. Like I'm all about issues now, and I hardly refer to the whole left right crap. I just don't care.
Well, and
but that's just like me. That's me.
I have to say, I was disappointed with how the movement at large dropped the ball regarding the current crisis. I won't say the name of the virus because I don't know if it does anything bad to your channel to mention it.
It's already losing stuff. Yeah.
Because because the movement was so focused on the issue of demographics and demographics alone, they were completely unprepared for an attack from a different angle. And, you know, it seemed like the attack was coming on the demographic front. All this immigration and multiculturalism and critical race theory, like that really just seemed to be the angle of attack of the globalists, right?
Yeah,
and
that's
it turns out
it
it turns out to be just a distraction, because what front have they made a critical attack from? The health front. And this is a subject on which the majority of the movement is not well versed in and was not prepared to fight back with facts. And a number of people within the movement just kind of fell for the narrative hook, line, and sinker. And they don't understand. I put up a poll on Twitter a few months back asking how many people knew what Agenda 21 was without looking it up. The vast majority of people did not. How can you claim to fight against the globalists when you don't even know what Agenda 21 is? And it's right there on the internet. They're not hiding it. What's your excuse for not being well versed on this? And if you don't know what that is, then how can you know whether or not they're launching an attack to further that agenda?
Exactly.
If you are going to spend all your time being focused on the issue of race, when things are happening that are going to quickly render that topic rather irrelevant, I mean, I'm frankly more concerned about not living in a communist dystopia where we have to live in the pod and eat the bugs, and the government tells us when and where we're going to work, and if you're a dissident, you don't get your welfare, and you're shut out of the banking system, and you can't live or raise a family. These are things that people on the right need to be concerned about, because these are all. And this is why I kind of start to drift away from the movement, is because of this obsessive focus on race to the exclusion of everything else, including issues that are far more urgent to address. And that if we don't address those issues, then the racial issue becomes a moot point anyway. So I don't have any hostility towards them. I don't disavow them. I'm friends with a lot of people within the movement. I just feel more and more on the periphery of it. I don't do the disavowal game. I don't agree with it. I'm not going to disavow anybody.
I've been disavowed by people who claim that they don't believe in disavowal. But I'm not going to disavow anyone. I agree with you that that's just silly to do. It's just.
There are people within the movement who I don't particularly like or agree with, but I'm not going to publicly disavow any of them or tell other people that they shouldn't listen to them or attack them in any way.
Exactly. There's no need.
And I think people on the right play the disavowal game just as much as the left do, and I think it's terrible. I don't think it's something we should do.
I agree.
You know, I'm much more interested in finding allies and building bridges with people who I can work with on similar issues. Even if it's just one issue we agree on, you know, I'm happy to kind of get on the train with you and go in the same direction, and we can just each get off at our own different stops. It doesn't mean we can't have a friendly chat along the way.
That's why we get along so well.
You know, so I mean, the movement is the movement. It's like any disorganized organization. You know, it's got its problems. It's got some pluses. There are a lot of good and genuine people in it. There are a lot of smart people in it.
Very smart. Yeah.
And you know, for the most part, I like them. I don't have a problem with them. I just, as I become more interested in spiritual stuff, I think it was inevitable that was going to happen. And this kind of goes back to the issue you asked me before about the importance of race. Whereas they're just putting more importance on it than I want to give it. And they're putting importance on it only from a material genetic aspect. Whereas the importance I really try to take a more spiritual understanding of it, which, yeah, it does get into some esoteric concepts that most people are not going to be familiar with. I do my best to educate people about those concepts on my channel if they're interested in learning about it. But I mean, I don't expect that most people watch it, so I can't really hold them to account if they don't know about it. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
And not everybody's even interested in that stuff anyway. So
yeah.
I'm just kind of more of a live person.
No, you're good. I like your outlooks on things, and certainly some of the things you've said. I'm going to try and implement a bit further as well, because I don't like the whole. I watched Mariah Carey is all over the internet at the moment because she just released a book, and I watched her interview with Oprah, and I'm realizing just how condescending Oprah can be sometimes. And I already knew that, but then when you watch it again, you're just kind of like, I hope I don't come off like that when I interview people. And I think maybe I have at times. I've come off. What's postulating, like a bit, what's the word? Anyway, grandizing in some way. And then I the last thing I ever want to do is come off that way. And I think maybe at times that I have. And so that's why I like your approach to life, where you're like, you do you, but this is what I think, but you do you. Like, and I like that. And I think that's something that I need to implement better, because I think even when I try my hardest to not come off a certain way, like I am being, I don't know the word, but anyway, yeah. So it's something I need to work on, because I have no reason to be condescending or arrogant, because I'm learning. I'm learning still, even with all these interviews. I'm still learning, and I want to come off only as someone who is learning.
Yeah. Well, there's an old proverb about, which is easier, put carpet down over the whole world or put on a pair of shoes.
There you go.
A lot of people spend so much energy trying to change other people, to tell them how to live and how they should be.
Doesn't work.
And it doesn't work. It's completely ineffective. No. But it's like, why don't you just work on yourself instead? Like, you're not a perfect person.
No, I'm not.
And if other people bother you, like, that's an indication of something within you that you need to address. That's a really good start for shadow work for anybody who wants to integrate their shadow. But once you can control your reactions to other people. If it's like,
just
if I'm like, if somebody doesn't like my videos on Julius Evola, let's say they think all of his ideas are dumb and my videos are dumb and stuff. I mean, I don't get upset about that, because what does it matter to me whether or not that person agrees with me? How does that affect my life at all? And, if I'm getting upset about that, to me, it's like, oh, that's my ego talking. That's my ego feeling wounded and feeling like it needs to defend itself. But if you can kind of step back from ego and just be accepting, you don't get as upset with people. And I do kind of feel like this is like a society-wide problem, but I mean, even just in the context of the movement as a whole, getting angry with other people for not agreeing with you or for not living the way you think they should, like,
that's silly.
Within the movement, there's just so much judgment and condescension about, well, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. And why don't you believe this? And you're wrong if you don't think like me, and all this ridiculous purity spiraling. For God's sake, just worry about yourself.
I know. I hate it so much. Yeah, you're so good. Yeah.
Nobody is impressed by that. No one on the internet has ever changed their mind because some other internet rando came along and said, you should have kids. You should be in the kitchen. Like, name one woman who ever went out and changed her lifestyle because some rando on the internet said that. It just turns her off from doing it and makes it less likely that she'll do it. It's so ineffective.
Very ineffective.
But it's also like, why aren't you the same religion as me? And why don't you put as much importance on this issue as I do? And you're dumb if you don't think like me.
And it's like, dare you not be a vegan. F off.
Ego. Come on. Just
so true.
We're all different. Everybody has a different path in this life. Let people find their own way. People will make mistakes, and you might think they are extremely dumb and stupid and doing things that you would never do. And, oh, I'm so smart because I would never do that. Well, that's your ego talking again, but it's their mistake to make. That's how we learn. That's how we grow in life. You know, it's always funny to me. It kind of reminds me of parents who don't have kids and then say, well, I would never let my kid do that. Oh, you're in for a big surprise. You don't have as much control over how your kids turn out as you think you do.
Funny.
And those are the people who end up like being these micromanaging parents who are trying to force their kid to be the person that they want them to be, instead of just stepping back and being accepting and saying, you know what, this is the child God gave me. Lord, help me, give me patience. But let me accept this child for who they are and just help them find their own path in life. And
I love that.
It's the same. I take the same approach with other adults that I take with any child. And that's that this soul is on life, has this life here on earth for a purpose that is unknown to me. Only God knows. It's their job to find out what it is. How can I support this person in finding the right path and helping them to make the right choices to discover what that path is? So, you know, maybe I'm sure I was a huge disappointment to my parents because I didn't stay Catholic. Well, I know that I was, but they would have saved themselves a lot of heartache and suffering if they just accepted that my path was different from what they thought it was. And they could accept that maybe I could find God in a different way than what they found, or that maybe my destiny in life is not necessarily what they would want for their child. And, you know, it's, I say this to other parents all the time that, you know, a lot of times parents want to force their kids to be a certain way because they think it's going to save them suffering and keep them from making mistakes in life. No parent on earth has that power to stop their kid from suffering in this life, because this life is suffering, and it's suffering because we're separate from God and because we're an illusion. But even Jesus's mother could not prevent him from suffering. And if Mary couldn't save her kid from suffering, who do you think you are that you could prevent your kid from suffering? And once you look at it like that, and you can even take that view and extrapolate it to everyone you deal with in life, it's not my responsibility to prevent suffering or to prevent them from making mistakes. My only responsibility to this person, if there's somebody that I care about and have a connection to and not some stranger on the internet, in which case mind your own business. But if it's somebody I care about, I've got to accept them for who they are. And I've got to allow them to make their mistakes. And I can't force anything on them. All I can do is be ready with the answers when they finally do have questions. And if they're having trouble making a decision, just give them advice that helps them weigh up their options rather than telling them what to do. And freeing yourself from the responsibility of the outcomes of someone else's life, like, it just lifts a huge burden off your shoulders. You don't have to be a control freak anymore. And I see this so much in the movement. All of these people are a bunch of control freaks because they don't have any control over their own lives. They don't have control over their emotional reactions. They feel triggered when somebody is doing something differently from them. Well, why? How does it invalidate your lifestyle just because I'm doing something different or because I believe something different? Why are you so
They lack emotional maturity.
Very much.
Because they lack emotional maturity.
If you feel confident in what you're doing, it shouldn't bother you that other people aren't doing the same thing as you. Why do you need to be validated in a way that requires everyone else to participate in your lifestyle? I mean, there are people whose lifestyles I fundamentally disagree with and think are extremely wrong and degenerate. I don't go around trying to force them to stop, because at the end of the day, it's their mistake to make. It's their life journey. It's between them and God. Like, their soul is not my responsibility. Only my soul is my responsibility.
Neither is their guilt. Like,
Exactly.
Well, I think we've covered every topic that I wanted to get out with you. I really appreciate you agreeing to do this interview. Thank you so much. I'm regretting not having my light on. I thought the daylight would have been sufficient, but oh well.
Oh, you look
okay.
lovely.
Ah, thanks. Well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for this interview, guys. If you liked this chat and you want to see PhilosophiCat, the link to the description is in the description box below. Her interview is her channel will be below. So it's a great channel. It's very she's very articulate, and her videos are fantastically edited. It's like watching a work of art, so you'll get a lot out of it.
Oh, thank you.
That's okay. I think it's true. But yeah, I'd love to catch up with you again, even if it's just like another phone call. But anyway, this was great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for organizing it. It was fun.
Yes, it was. Two girls talking from different races.
I don't get to do that very often. I hardly ever get to talk to another girl. I think the last one would have been Robin Riley, and that's probably close to a year ago now.
Oh, so, I like her. Yeah,
I like
she and I have spoken, and she said she wanted not me on her show, but that she would come on mine, and I think she just forgot about me. So if you could remind her, please. That'd be nice.
Sure. I know she's quite busy at the moment with her. I think she's got a new baby that she's busy with. So,
no excuse. No excuse. She made a promise to me. You have to remind her. No.
Yeah. But yeah, she's probably the last one I talked to. So it's nice to chat with another girl because it's a very different dynamic than when I'm chatting with a man. So
yeah, for sure. It's very true. Yay! All right. Well,
a little comfier with another girl to just.
I think so too. Yeah, and I'm still anti-feminist, but I'm still very much pro-woman in so many
exactly
instances.
Same.
People think that's a contradiction. Anti-feminist but pro-woman. Yeah, people think that's a contradiction, but it's not. But anyway.
No, because feminists are anti-woman.
Exactly. Yay! We know things. All right. Cool. Yeah. I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna check. I think the chickens are fine. But anyway.
Yeah, make sure they're all still alive.
Yes. All right.
Don't eat any of them.
No. I